Hey Fantastic, my name is Luke, and this week is the Q&A. So I've collected all the questions that I've been asked, and I've put them all on my computer, and I will read them out and answer them. First question I've been asked is, what is your favorite place to wind down when life/dysphoria gets too much? I really like the beach, sailing, beach, or I'll have a bath, basically anywhere with water. I don't really know why. This person also asked which Harry Potter book was my favorite. I think if I had to choose, it would come down to Half-Blood Prince, Goblet of Fire, or Deathly Hallows, and I think Half-Blood Prince would win, just slightly. Which type of characters from books or TV did you identify the most with? A few notable characters that I can remember really relating to and really finding power in their stories were Avatar Aang from Avatar The Last Airbender, and also really related to Will in the book series The Ranger's Apprentice. I remember reading the book and really appreciating the fact that there was a male protagonist that was not just like this big buff dude. So I think probably if I had to choose a type, it would be male characters that isn't like the typical knight in shining armor kind of character. Also, I got this mug today on a complete impulse buy, and it's got a Dalmatian on it, and it's massive. Like, look how big it is. I got a couple questions from YouTube user It's Jaden21. The first of which is, how did I know I was ready to transition? I never really had a doubt of when I was going to transition. I never really felt like I wasn't ready to transition. From the moment I started transitioning, I knew exactly what steps in my transition I wanted to take, and I never really had any doubts on that, so I can't really say anything on that. I don't really know when I decided or was ready to decide, but once I accepted that, hey, this is possible, and you're not gonna lose everyone you care about, that was probably when I really realized that I was ready. But it wasn't because of me not realizing myself. I was more worried about how everyone else would react. What's my favorite planet in our solar system besides Earth? Earth is definitely my favorite planet. I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Neptune. I don't really know why. I've also liked Mars and Neptune. There you go. From 1 to 10, how afraid of the dark am I? I would say I'm like a -1. I'm not afraid of the dark at all. In fact, if I want to sleep, it needs to be basically pitch black. What is my favorite pizza topping? My favorite pizza topping, I like pineapple on pizza. I'm definitely in team pineapple on pizza. Probably chicken, pineapple, cheese. Cheese is my favorite pizza topping. I can't believe I didn't even think about that. Like mozzarella cheese or buffalo mozzarella. Buffalo mozzarella is delicious. Changed my mind. I changed my mind. It's cheese. Do you believe in aliens? Yes, I do. I think it's very arrogant to assume that we're the only life forms in the universe. Saying that there is no possible way that there is another creature inhabiting another planet in a completely other galaxy somewhere in our universe, that's a huge assumption to make. I definitely think that aliens exist. I don't really know the chances of them having a developed civilization. Maybe there might just be like single-celled organisms, but I'm sure that there is life somewhere else. The universe is so big, I don't think people realize just how huge the universe is. There's no way that we're the only things out here. How did you overcome the moments where you doubted that you were trans? Like I mentioned earlier, I didn't really have moments of personal doubt. It was more doubt on whether or not I would be able to do it. I was afraid that I would not be able to sacrifice everything for transition, and I was worried that I would be forced to. And that's probably the closest to any doubts I ever had. I think that's taught me a very valuable life lesson that being selfish is okay. And it took me a very long time to learn that, because I'm the sort of person that really wants to make other people feel good, and I really had to realize that sometimes if it's a conflict of interest, you've got to put yourself first, and that's how I overcame it, because I realized, you know what, screw this, screw everyone else. At the end of the day, I'm here to live for me, and if I don't do this, I will not live. That's how I overcame that doubt, by accepting and acknowledging that my feelings were valid. I needed to put myself in front of everyone else in my life, because there's no way I would be able to put others in front of my life if I didn't have a life. Be authentically yourself, and don't let anyone stop you, because at the end of the day, you're here for you, no one else, and you can't be the best person you can be for others that you care about if you aren't being the best person for yourself. This question is from One Direction and 5 Seconds of Summer, and it says, "Hi Luke, I like your accent." Thank you. When did you learn English, and do you speak another language? I'm a native English speaker. I don't know, I would have been, about a year or 2 years old. The reason I've got such a strong accent is because I grew up in Hong Kong, went to an international school, which is why I've got the international accent that you can't quite place. It's a mix of a whole bunch of different people who were from different countries who had very thick accents from their countries that have kind of influenced my accent. So I had a teacher from South Africa, for example, and I had Canadian teachers, American teachers, British teachers. As for second languages, I've been learning Chinese since I was about 4 years old. In everyday life, I am a fluent Chinese speaker. But when it comes to things that are more advanced, like talking about politics or talking about certain topics that I don't have the vocabulary for, I am nowhere near fluent, and I would not be able to have a conversation with you. I haven't spoken Chinese in a very long time, so I would very doubt my fluency at the moment, but I am pretty proficient in Chinese, and if someone dumped me in China without any way of contacting anyone, I'd be able to sort myself out. Following on from that, I got a question from DogLover12. Real nice name, I love dogs too. They say, you've talked about how your family is Australian but you grew up in Hong Kong. Do you identify more with Hong Kong culture or Australian culture, and how long did you live in Hong Kong? That's a great question. I was really hoping I'd get a question to do with my culture, because that's something that I feel is very much overlooked, because obviously I come across as an Australian person. When I open my mouth, my accent sounds a little bit dodgy, but no one would ever really assume that I'm from Hong Kong. I really like being able to talk about that because that was a huge part of my life and is still a huge part of my life. My family still lives in Hong Kong. As for where I identify more as, I don't feel like I identify with either. I don't really know how to explain it, but I definitely identify with many aspects of Hong Kong culture. I celebrate lots of traditional Chinese holidays. I grew up doing so, but I've always been made to feel like I see these sorts of traditional and cultural experiences almost through a window because I'm not actually from Hong Kong. And I've always felt this way. And I don't know how much of that is the fact that my parents weren't from Hong Kong, so this isn't their culture. They probably felt when we were growing up, oh, well, we're not even going to stay here long, Australia is home. And so I kind of always grew up with that mentality that Australia is home and identifying with Australia. But I never experienced anything like that. Most of the things that are a huge part of Australian culture and an Australian childhood, I completely missed out on. So I don't really identify with either as such, because on one hand, I identify quite strongly with Hong Kong and the culture there, but on the other hand, I never really fully felt like I was 100% accepted and included in that. It's kind of difficult for me to identify solely with that, but then on the other hand, I never experienced any Australian culture, so I can't really identify fully with that either. So I identify with both equally. I can't really compare what I prefer or where I identify more, but I feel like I'm very much just a combination of both. And my cultural identity is just a big question mark squiggly line. Like, I can blend into Australian culture quite well and come across like I'm a native Australian, but on the other hand, it's almost like a facade and I'm not actually genuinely like that. I never really feel like I belong in a culture, and I really belong anywhere. On one hand, that's kind of sad, but on the other hand, it means I don't really have any ties to anything, and I like that. I would never really feel homesick, because homesickness is what I've always known. I've never not felt homesick, because growing up in Hong Kong, I was always under the impression, and it was almost always told or implied that I'm really from Australia. And then going to Australia and being in Australia for boarding school and moving and living in Australia now, I recognize that Hong Kong is my home more so than Australia ever was. But now it's kind of different because I spent, 2 years in Melbourne and I've settled in here. It's a huge question mark, but I kind of like that about me. On the other hand, it does make me feel a little bit isolated, and I feel like no one really understands me because most people have at least something that they can fully identify with. And I've talked about this in the Gryffindor video for Transtastic. I'll link that up there. Growing up in Hong Kong, that's really impacted my identity. I feel like I don't fit in anywhere. That sounds super angsty teenager. I genuinely don't really feel like I ever really fit in, because I was always made to feel like I was the other, no matter where I was. As for how long I lived in Hong Kong, I've lived there off and on my entire life, and consistently for 11 years. Next question is from Xanderthepander, and it is, how much do you love me? And that is very much, bae. I love you very much. Liam asks, what's your Hogwarts house? My Hogwarts house is Gryffindor. I am the least Slytherin person on the planet. I am not Slytherin at all, but probably would be more Ravenclaw than Hufflepuff, just slightly, if I wasn't Gryffindor. Aaron says, Luke, I've heard that peri-top surgery is not as effective as other methods like double incision, since it's more possible for a chest to grow back easier. How happy are you with your results? And positive and negative thoughts. First of all, I want to say that that is a total misconception. The thing that grows is the breast tissue. And if the breast tissue is completely removed, even if there is some subcutaneous fat there, it's not going to grow. Same with double incision, all the breast tissue is removed because that's actually anchored to your pectoral muscle, so that actually needs to be removed from that. There's no way that the surgeon will not do that. And sure, in peri you might have a little bit more subcutaneous fat left over because it's harder to remove it as opposed to directly like cutting and then taking everything off and then stitching it back down. But in peri, I definitely do not think that you are more likely to have a chest or your chest is to grow back. As for my results, I am 100% happy with my results. I'm just going to show you my results now quickly. This is my chest about a year and a half post-op. My nipples were never removed. The incision is around my nipples. The surgeon cut here, removed everything, all of the breast tissue, and then did like a perch string suture where he took the skin here and then basically stitched it here and pulled it together, and then it healed up. I am very happy with my results. I do have a little bit of extra subcutaneous fat, but the little bit of fat was left was actually just to make it look more natural. Unlike double incision where you can cut it and then stitch it, surgeons have to be more careful with how much they take out, because if they take out too much, the skin can actually contract too much and it can actually make your chest look a little concave. It might not necessarily be as like super duper flat as it would be with DI, but it's not unnatural. I think the only things I would change, and this isn't necessarily to do with peri, this is just how my body healed, was my nipples stretched out a little bit, and because of that they're a little bit large, so I'd probably reduce them slightly around my nipple and areola. And there's a little bit of extra fat here which could be taken out, but that would be a little bit of lipo. Besides that, I'm 100% happy with my results. I do not regret having peri at all. I hope that answers your question, but yeah, peri isn't more likely to mean that your chest is going to grow back. I knew someone who had peri pre-T and didn't go on T for a while either, and nothing happened to their chest. It stayed exactly the same. Sure, you might gain a little bit more subcutaneous fat there, but that would also happen with DI because it's to do with the body fat and where it's stored. Sam Colin Clark asks, was there any point in your transition that scares you? Having that moment where I realized that, oh, this is what's happening and there's something I can do to fix this was incredibly terrifying. That and coming out. I had a really bad coming out experience the first couple times I came out. I ended up actually properly coming out to my parents 3 times. They didn't go well, and I was very anxious and depressed about that, and that was really difficult, and I struggled a lot with that. Obviously they've come around and now they're my biggest support, but dealing with that was very difficult, and that was probably the scariest point of my transition. And that moment where I realized that I was essentially giving up my entire life and everyone in it in order to do something for me, which I knew I had to do and I was willing to do, but that's still really scary, especially being a 17-year-old kid. Having to face up to that potential outcome was terrifying. But besides that, I didn't really have any fears about transitioning in regards to surgeries or going on hormones or anything like that. Like, I was very sure of myself when it comes to my physical transition, and even now with like thoughts towards bottom surgery, because I don't know if I mentioned this, but I am going to pursue phalloplasty in the future. That's something I'm going to pursue, and even knowing that there are people who have had terrible complications and have had difficulty, I would still take it all, and I'm not afraid of any of that. When I say not afraid, I don't mean I'm shit scared for the surgery. I know it's going to be terrifying, but at the same time, I'm more afraid of living my life without going through that. Most of the physical parts of my transition aren't the scariest part. For me, it's more the emotional things and the realization of not being able to live my authentic life because other things are stopping me. That's what terrifies me the most of transition. Knowing that because there's no coverage, it might be years before I'm able to forward phalloplasty. That's upsetting and that's terrifying. But on the other hand, I know lots of people who have had doubts about transitioning and doubts on whether they want to go on hormones or have surgery, and that's completely valid. Just because I haven't had that experience, if you do feel that way, you are any less trans. I just want to have a little bit of a PSA there, because I know that hearing stories like me of people who realized that they were trans and knew exactly what they wanted and knew that they wanted to fully transition, which is completely in heavy quotation marks, there's no such thing as fully transitioning, but society's definition of fully transitioning, just because you might not relate to that feeling, and just because you might not feel that yourself, does not mean that you're any less trans, or that your transition is somehow not as valid as mine. Just want to say that, because I would never want to make someone feel that way, even if it wasn't intentional. But Kaden asks, I was wondering how you or your parents explained your transition to your younger siblings, or if they did it at all. I have 2 younger sisters very close in age to your sisters, and my dad won't tell them because he thinks it will confuse them, which I think he should just get onto, because my younger sister, who is 6, has already asked why I'm starting to get hair on my face. If you didn't watch last week's video, I mentioned that I have 2 younger sisters and I have a younger brother. My younger brother's 15 and my sisters are 13 and 10. My siblings were quite young when I ended up having to tell them. So my sisters were 8 and nearly 11, and my brother was 13. There's a bit of a story for my little brother and how I came out to him. Basically, it was around Christmas time and we went to go and get a photo with Santa. When Santa gendered me as male, and my mum didn't correct Santa this time. Afterwards, my brother was really angry and he stormed out of Santa's cottage and basically declared to my parents that he was really mad at Santa and couldn't believe that Santa would do that to me. Mum was like, what are you talking about? And my brother said, I find it really frustrating when Santa assumes that Lou is a boy just because Lou wears more masculine clothes and has short hair. It's not fair, because just because Lou does these things doesn't mean that Lou isn't a girl. Which on one hand I was like, you go, because you know that obviously gender expression and gender are completely different and they don't have to relate to that. He was angry on my behalf, and Mum was like, you're gonna have to talk to him and tell them that you have no problem with being gendered as male and that it's gonna happen more because you're male. So I went out with him and I was like, hey Henry, you know how Santa called me male before? And he was like, yeah. I was really angry about that. And I was like, don't worry about being angry about it, because I don't mind it, because I identify as male. He was about 13 at that time, so I think just being direct, you don't need to go into the nitty-gritty details about how you're going on hormones and da-da-da-da. I never once addressed my siblings about surgery or hormones. I don't think they even know I'm on hormones or what it even means. I don't really know what they assume, to be completely honest. As for my sisters, my mum ended up telling my sisters they were brushing their teeth or something, and Mum says, you guys feel inside that you are girls, right? And they both said, yeah, we feel like we're girls. And then Mum said, if someone said, okay, we can make you be born again and you can be born a boy. Would you want to do that? And they both went, no. And Mum said, okay, well, if Lou could go back, she would choose to be a boy. If she could go back in time, she would be born a boy. And they went, oh, okay. And then Mum said, so because Lou wants to be a boy and is a boy inside, we're going to use boy pronouns and we're going to use a boy name now. And they went, oh, okay. And then they went to bed. And then I woke up and it was fine. It took a long time for them to get the pronouns and name right, but they eventually got it. Now, even though my siblings were old enough to remember me transitioning and remember me before, but my sisters forget that I'm trans. They treat me as a brother. We have a much better relationship because I can actually relate to them. My advice would be basically really simple. I don't want to be a boy. I've never wanted to be a boy. I just am a boy. But for the sake of explaining it to an 8-year-old, I want to be a boy. Even if that's not completely politically correct, most kids don't really care. They won't bat an eyelid. If everyone starts using male pronouns and a male name, they're not really going to care. It's not going to freak them out. And particularly if you just keep it normalized, you know? If my parents made a big deal about it, and if I was super angry at them for using the wrong pronouns, it probably would be a lot harder. But because it was very much a chill thing where my parents mentioned it, from then on, everyone around them was using male pronouns, and eventually they just got it and it was over. And now my entire family, everyone uses male pronouns. No one even makes a mistake at all. It's completely fine. It took a little bit of time to get there, but a lot quicker than I was anticipating it. I was expecting it to really screw everyone over and that my siblings would get really confused and wouldn't be able to deal with it, but most people seem to underestimate that children just genuinely don't really care about shit like that. Like, I remember once my mum, she was watching a video and it was run by trans kids and their mums, and it was like a music video to Shake It Off or something like that. And Mum was watching it and my sisters came in because they loved that song. And my little sister asked, oh, what are they doing? And Mum said, oh, it's a video for transgender awareness. And my little sister goes, what's transgender? And Mum was like, you know, when you feel like you're a boy inside when you're a girl, or if you feel like a girl inside when you're a boy, kind of like Lou. And she goes, oh yeah, I forgot, and walks off. That was about a year on from me coming out. Just be super chill about it and don't make a huge deal out of it, because if you make a big deal out of it, that's when they'll start to get confused. Don't just let them blatantly misgender you. Be like, oh, remember I use male pronouns now, remember he, they'll be fine. If you think about it, the youngest sibling I have known for 10 years. So I'm gonna have another 60 years with her. So that's 60 years of my life where I'm going to be her brother and a boy, compared to the 8 years where I was her sister, and even then, probably only 3 or 4 years where I was genuinely presenting as female 100% and people didn't misgender me or there was any confusion around my gender. Small Zombie Doodle on Instagram asks if they can have my cat. Now, I would say yes, but I love her very much, and I think she would miss Daddy a little bit. But I'll let her give you a hug. You miss Dad, yeah? I like to tell myself she'd miss me. The last question in this really long Q&A, just for context, I don't know how long this video is going to end up, but at the moment it's at 52.5 minutes, so that's going to be a lot to edit. I really hope this video isn't like 30 minutes long. So the last question is anonymous, and they asked, where do you see yourself living in the future? A place you've lived already or somewhere new? I really like Melbourne, and I can genuinely see myself living in Melbourne for the rest of my life, or at least being settled in Melbourne. I can see myself having a family here and, you know, getting married and next level adulting in Melbourne. There's no way I'd be able to live in Adelaide. Being in Adelaide just felt so trapping. I felt like I was in a cage. I can see myself potentially living in Hong Kong again. I wouldn't rule it out. I think out of the 3 places I've lived in, Adelaide, Melbourne, Hong Kong, I'd be most likely to live in Melbourne, but I would really like to live maybe somewhere else. I would be happy to get up and move anywhere, really, as long as I felt safe doing so. So I don't really know where the world's gonna take me and what opportunities I'll have, but I'm definitely the sort of person that if given an opportunity like that, I would definitely take it. I'd like to spend some time abroad somewhere else, maybe a year or a little bit less, like an exchange thing. That'd be cool. Probably where I'd want to go would be either the UK or Canada, but I'd be happy going anywhere as long as I get to sort of see the world a bit more. So that is all of the questions. Thank you very much everyone who asked me questions, and I'm sorry if I missed any. If there's anything that you don't understand or anything else, feel free to comment down below. I'm happy to talk about anything I've said here. This has been really fun. I'm not sure if Transtastic's going to do something like this again, but if it does, that'd be awesome. Thank you very much, and I will see you guys next week. Bye.